Hi everybody, sitting here with my little pilot's headset on at the home office. Got my week 3 notes here ready, so excuse me if I do some reading with them and so forth, but here we go. This week is all about the principles, roles, and functions of an EMS training agency and the EMS training officers and so forth. We begin with two broad areas, and that's primary education, what that means, and then continuing education and all the implications and facets of that. The implications for our EMS leaders, managers, individual folks in the world of EMS, departments, and all of us actually. So first let me begin with what do we mean by primary education. So in America, you went to primary school. That was your grades 1 through 6, first through 6th grades usually. Primary education was also your elementary education. Those were our terms for it. And when you got past your primary education, you either went to middle school or high school. Middle school, grades 7 through 9 or so, maybe 7 through 10 in some schools. And in your high school was grades 9 or 10 through 12. Usually 12 years of K-12 education, your primary and your secondary education. When you got out of your high school class and got your high school diploma or GED or whatever, and you went on to other further education if you did, which you did, by the way. I speak the hypothetical if everybody, and if you did meaning those who do. They go into post-secondary education. Now, post-secondary education can be a Creighton University or a college that might be like you went to. It could be a community college for those who start there, and it could be a trade school, like learning to be an electrician. That's your post-secondary education. I say all that to say, why do I talk about primary and then continuing education here? Because it's your primary EMS education. And that's your EMT and paramedic class and all the complexities that go into beginning that. So your first CPR course, your BCLS course, and maybe then your trauma life support course, PHTLS or BTLS, and emergency vehicle operations, and all of those HIPAA and OSHA and other kind of courses that get you up to speed to even start your entryway up through your paramedic class, which is still primary education to get you to the entry point of being a paramedic. So the key point I bring all this up is to say that in the primary education we have in the United States a national guideline, National Education Standards, developed by NHTSA. That was based on a prior National Highway Traffic Safety Administration National Standard Curriculum. Now, the National Education Standards map to what was that National Standard Curriculum, and a student may then say, well, I've been through the National Education Standards course. Fair enough. But not all courses are equal. I think we talked about it a little last week, if I recall, where we might say that Kansas still requires an esophageal obturator airway. Most modern state-of-the-art systems abandoned the EOA a number of years ago. Medical anti-shock trousers was part of the standard guidelines and standard course content. Might still be in there or not, but most EMS agencies have abandoned the medical anti-shock trousers. We could spend a few hours talking about the theory and positive indications and evidence for the medical anti-shock trousers, and a few minutes talking about the evidence against it and why it's not such a great idea. But some systems will have mask trousers, and some systems today may not. Most today won't, in fact. But that extends to endotracheal intubation and rapid sequence induction. There's a difference there. Some systems will have etomidate as an assisting drug, and some systems will only have succinylcholine, and others may not have RSI at all. 12-lead EKGs and drugs. A great example with the scopes and drugs would be thiamine. Thiamine can be given for patients when they're absolutely necessary in that first 12 hours of getting a dose of D50. There's no urgency to give it. But at the same point, you don't want to give the D50, have a patient walk away needing the thiamine and not getting it, and having catastrophic Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome with a horrific outcome afterward. Most systems in the country really aren't giving thiamine because it really isn't urgently necessary, and there's a few systems in our own area, Chicago, a few hundred miles to the east of here. Yep, they give thiamine all the time when indicated. So you might have a paramedic that has the national standards and guidelines, and two different creatures from one system to the next, one state to the next, one training agency to the next. And how do you know that? And how do you know what their full education was and standards were, and how do you know that they match yours? What's the steps to go through that, and how would you do that? That's a point of discussion for us. And again, we talked about it a little last week, and it still lingers there because it's a part of our job to do that. But I take it from one other level this week too. You may be a person changing and going from one job to the next. And by doing that, when you go there, how do you establish to them what your education level and training levels and all of that were with them when you go there? And may seem kind of obvious and simple, except it's not. If we took my own paramedic training and scope of practice, well, it wouldn't qualify as a paramedic today. Now, I've kept up because I've taught the new levels and trainings and all of the paramedic content as we come along. So for me, it's relatively simple if you look at my background and CV and where I've been. However, if you take a look at another paramedic who's been out there practicing for years, their way of keeping up has been through refreshers and continuing education and certificate courses, etc. Can you weave all that together to a current modern day state-of-the-art paramedic within your system for the RSI you've added, or the 12-lead EKGs, or the new drugs, and gone to amiodarone from lidocaine, or over to abandoning verapamil in favor of other kind of things, and maybe calcium channel blockers altogether gone? Those are the kind of things that you've got to think about when you're doing that. So how can you and would you go about assuring that new prospect matches your own agency? And that's in all the domains too. Are they an affective domain match? So if you come out of a Creighton program, you've had a certain orientation toward skills, academic skills and knowledge and so forth. If you come out of another program, it may be, I say in the Creighton program, even the affective skills, values-based training and sensitivity and compassion and social justice. You might come out of another program. Some programs are purely skills-oriented. Can you get that endotracheal intubation in within the 15 seconds? And can you read into 12-lead EKG and 10 of them in 25 seconds or whatever? Those would be the kind of standards they'd be after. And last week we did discuss this. We discussed it from a standpoint of doing your reference checks and your credentials checks and your due diligence that you have to go through. And if you're looking for that job elsewhere, producing your documents and backgrounds and letters of recommendation, all that's fine for you. But here's the question for you. What would you do if you determined that a potential hire is an excellent fit for your service in many areas, but hasn't been trained then in that 12-lead EKG interpretation, or the rapid sequence induction intubation, or maybe some of the drugs that you use that they don't use? So you use etomidate, but they don't. What do? Do you reject them? Do you take them on provisionally and during a probationary period require them to get the kind of training and provide it as part of your in-service education and training program? Do you have a 1 or 2 week or more orientation training program from all the people that you do hire? You maybe say, you'll get in a position, you'll get hired, but go out and get this training and be able to send them to a place. Pay for it yourself, go get it, and then I'll hire hire you if you get that. Every model exists. The question is, when is it better? When it is the right thing for your own program and your own system that you would do? That's a real question for you. We really have that as a live issue that occurs all the time. It's real. Let's go to continuing education for a moment. And continuing education is much less clear than it seems at first. We have continuing education, and you've got the National Registry refresher course, or the Nebraska refresher course. And there's a nuanced difference there, because a lot of things are continuing education. You might write a paper and get it published in a journal, and the word count might count as continuing education. And we've got CSPEAMS, Continuing Education Board Certification Board for Emergency Medical Services, CSPEAMS, Continuing Education Certification Board for EMS Services. And CSPEAMS has its own set of standards. Now, the undergraduates that took the EMS Educator class know about CSPEAMS, and we've talked a little bit about it at the undergraduate level. At the graduate level, it's just an organization that looks and takes what you propose as a continuing education course. So it looks at the content. And the content is often word counted. So you have so many thousands of words giving you so much reading time at an average reading pace to say that, okay, a person that reads that content gets a certain amount of credit hours for reading, say, 3,000 words, whatever that specific number is. And then the word count is also measured, and content is also measured for the reading level. So it's got to be at a, say, K-10, a 10th grade level, or a 7th grade level, or 8th grade level, or a high school level. Usually I think we operate at around an 8th grade level in the world of EMS, believe it or not, for our working vocabulary. So you've got content at a certain mid-low high school level, high mid-level middle school level. You've got a certain number of word counts, and then you have specific objectives. At the end of the session, the continuing education learner, participant, will have a certain number of objectives per each credit hour, and for those each objective there will be 3 or so test questions, and very strict guidelines on what the test questions will be. Now, CSPEAMS can be looked up, Continuing Education Certification Board for EMS, CSPEAMS, all those standards are there. They're all published, but the idea is that if you're going to do a training program, you might want to get it CSPEAMS approved. If it's CSPEAMS approved, the criteria are all there, and that gives you your valid credit hour. And CSPEAMS, for instance, in Nebraska, is approved for continuing education programs, and that will count for distance education that will apply to a certain number of the hours. Some programs and states, etc., require a certain number of direct contact hours too. So that's CSPEAMS. And let me simplistically define it. We said, what is continuing education? What is the refresher course? And it's anything that goes beyond your post-secondary when you're out there and practicing. It's what you're doing routinely through it and what you're doing to maintain it. So to start at the most basic level with this too, we have to start at the old BCLS and renewing and recertifying your BCLS. So why do I say there's anything just not absolutely straightforward about that? Well, because we used to go through our CPR training, and it was go in the room and get a certain number of hours of it and perform it and take a written test on it. Now the cognitive part is online, more and more and more, and a person can meet all of their CPR recertification by doing it online, and then taking the online certificate and going to a lab area and walking into a room with just a mannequin, and the mannequin senses by its sensors, correct CPR being done, and the person gets a certificate. Why is that a little complicated and a challenge? Well, at Creighton, our nursing school has people coming in from all over the world. And coming in from all over the world, we want to make sure that the person going in the room actually can do the actual skill and somebody else isn't doing it for them. That we have coached a person if they're not doing it perfectly, that we see them doing it long enough, that we have an interactive dialogue with them, that we know it's them that have really done it, not just a piece of paper certificate saying, this is me and I've done this, how do we know it's you and that you did that, and not your next door neighbor or your college roommate or whatever. So there's the computer enhanced type of stuff that does that. People might look at that and go, you're in post-secondary education now in this program. How do we know who you are? There's people in this course now. Most of you I have met in person and know most of you in person, but there's a couple of people in the course that I've never personally met. How do I know who you are exactly in the continuing education that was you that actually did it? So we go from basics, cardiac life support and CPR, to advanced cardiac life support and PALS and PHTLS, and that in with OSHA and HIPAA and all the other kind of things that are there, and making sure it's up to date. What would you do then? If you're in Creighton University School of Nursing and you get these people come in, do you require your own mega code? Would you do your own CPR? Would you require face-to-face? How do you do that? But if you're an EMS service administrator and we're in the world of continuing education, are you just going to say, there's the mannequin, go interact with the mannequin, get your certificate, that gives it to us with a checkbox that you've done it? And by the way, we know that you've done 6 successful cardiac resuscitations over the last 6 months. It makes my head explode that you even need to do that and cannot count what you're doing competently as part of that. So what do you count as really being required if you're doing your online management and monitoring and so forth? How else does it get a little complicated? What if you're hiring Bill Rainovich? Not just me, I mean a person with 40 to 50 years experience and been on boards and accreditation bodies and directed and taught every part of the paramedic course many times over, and been there and done that and written the book on many of these things, literally in terms of, you know, paramedic and mid-level courses and stuff like that. But you go to hire a Bill Rainovich, and what you find in hiring your Bill Rainovich is you're getting a person that's only been sitting and talking in front of a computer and standing in front of a classroom and writing papers, and you know, I don't even know what a patient, I can't even say the word patient anymore. Wouldn't know what a patient looks like if I saw one. Yeah. So what do you do? I mean, I come out and I'd like to volunteer in your town and your service. I'd like to maybe work as a paramedic in your company, in your unit. Would you hire me? And would you trust me to actually trust and know and see and have me do what was necessary with a paramedic? You know, I wouldn't be competent. Doesn't mean I couldn't learn it. Doesn't mean that a 2-week training session and an orientation, being coached, and watch me do the IV competently, and watch me, you know, draw up an IV and put some EKGs in front of me, so you can do the skills tests and run me. My expression is through the ringer. Make somebody like me go through every step, every bell and whistle, every test, and make me do it. And that's your obligation to do that if you're an EMS leader and manager and training officer, involved in quality assurance and the other kind of things that you will be in an EMS system. Goes for everything. Trauma, life support, pediatrics, advanced cardiac life support, everything. Right, driving the vehicle too. So there's the refreshers. There's the refreshers who, for those who really need it, and I think refreshers would be completely appropriate for somebody such as myself, who just plain needs it stone cold because of, you know, I'm stale. And you get somebody that is stale, needs a refresher. On the other hand, you get people that are active in a busy system, working 40 plus hours a week, seeing hundreds and hundreds and thousands maybe of emergency patients, and doing untold numbers of codes and skills, and then you put them through a refresher, and but it is what it is. And you have an obligation to maintain their licenses and standards and all that. So my next question for you, and this is one for the discussion boards too, who should pay for it? Literally. I mean, if you've got the agency, do you tell people you've got to maintain your registry and certification and license, and if you don't keep your continuing education up, you're gone? Should your agency provide all that? Should your agency be doing national registry refresher courses or seminars for continuing education and CPR and trauma and all the rest of it? Who should be doing that? Well, for a certain critical mass of an agency, like mass the size of, say, an Omaha fire, probably should do everything cost economically in-house, put everybody through it, take them off the shifts and have them in there special doing it. Makes sense. A mid-level, smaller community, sizes of our state capitals, whether it be Santa Fe, New Mexico, and or Omaha, Nebraska, and the smaller cities, mid-size, 70 sub 100,000, 50 to 70,000 communities, probably contract out to local agencies, get together, jointly do things, help coordinate them, have it happen at the state conferences, things like that. But then who's going to pay for it? Do the people have to take their own time? Do you give them work time to do it? There's a cost to doing that. And that's a business cost we're going to talk about later on in the course. But in general, it's in your own agency's interest very often to see that people get it done and pay for it. But if, which agency should be paying for it? Sometimes people work for two different agencies. And should you, if you talk about it as continuing education, be then funding somebody to go to a national conference or a state conference if it means travel and staying overnight? That's a question for you as a class, and something that there's no absolute single answer on, but something to be considered. So you have the validation of these things, you have the monitoring of the courses being offered, you have the tracking of it within your agency. Here's a question, a real live question. Well, you're recommending for your agency, if you're in that position as the EMS leader at your agency, will you accept distance education and online education? Now that's a silly question here, isn't it? Because we're saying, one, you know where I'm at. I do an instructor course 100% online. We do an educator refresher course 100% online. My answer is different than it would have been a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have said this online medium was just as good. And I've turned a corner and come around to most of the education is online. Now, if we think about that and go, what the heck? I mean, isn't it better to be in the room, to be looking at the person in the face? But I go over to the refresher course. 120 people out there. They're sitting in the room, and I lecture for a couple of hours. I have to ask myself, what are they really thinking about? How many have daydreamed? Have I really engaged their minds? Has having them sit in a seat and be present in the same room looking at me as valid as online instruction, where the only way they get credit, you get credit, anybody gets credit in this participating, is by what you go and do and submit and respond to. You've got to make the comment. You must have seen it. You must have been a part of it. That's what we're talking about. Do I trust that you have actually watched this far? I have no idea. I mean, every one of you might have watched about 2 minutes of this and gone and said, okay, turn down the sound, put on the TV, go wash the dishes, let this guy do this. I see that the thing's going to run for 30 minutes. I'll come back after 30 minutes, click it off, and as far as the computer concerned, I saw it. It's no different than being there face to face. There are things that people do, and I could do too. What's one thing that can be done if you want to actually do this is to sit here and say to you, you know, 6 plus 4 is equal to 10, and everybody knows that, but you're going to need to know that later. And then later on, I give you a pop quiz. And 6 plus some number equals another number. What is that other number? Or I could sit here and tell you, hey, you want to know something cool? This is not only a brown shirt, but I got a brown shoe on today. And I could sit there and go to you later and say, what color shoes was I wearing? Now I'm wearing a brown shirt, so that's a pretty good guess, but you get the point. Is it could have been tennis shoes. Maybe I could have my feet bare and not actually be wearing shoes. Just a trick question, you see. Sandals, whatever. My point is, there's a way to seed something right in here that measures whether you actually watched it or not. And there's a devious way to do it. If you answer it on the first question right and get it right, you get full credit. And if you watch it the second time and you have to get it right, you only get a certain amount of credit for having watched it the second time, but you had to get through and watched it. You sit there and go, oh, okay. But students can still collaborate. Hey, Ken, did you watch that? Matt, did you watch that? Llewellyn, Judy, Sally, Tom, whoever, did you see that? Tom says, yeah. He's really ridiculous about those trick questions, you know. He's wearing sandals. He wasn't to have any shoes on at all. Well, you got the trick answer, and students could collaborate. You watch the first 10 minutes, I'll watch the second 10 minutes, you watch the third 10 minutes, team watching. One person does it, I'll watch this week, you watch next week. There's ways around that too. There are ways to seed in different questions to different people. So I have 10 is one thing, shoes is the next thing, what color was my tie, you know, and maybe put on a tie and have I've got different kind of ties with different kind of themes. One's Scotch bottles, and another one's, you know, an Albuquerque balloon, and another one's a Seattle tower, and could literally have a question in there about the tie, or what was in the picture up behind me, and you know, brighten up that picture a little bit. I got these windows behind me, so I don't know the quality of what you're seeing yet. It might be a little higher than what I'm seeing at the moment, but you actually see Perseus up there from an Iranian paper. I could just, you know, bring up something else, a book, and oh, here's the Union of Minds and Hearts from St. Ignatius. And so what was the book that I showed? There's ways of testing that out with different kinds of test questions to different kinds of people. So you can do trivial little measures of did somebody see it or not. But that is a question of who actually saw something. Do you trust the distance education? A lot of it is professional trust. A lot of it with national conferences and seminars and rooms. And it had been traditional in the world of EMS. Medical conferences very often. People would go to their medical physicians, go to their surgeons, would go to their medical conference on a Wednesday and check in and head immediately out for their tea time and play hooky. It's unethical. A great deal of attention has been paid to it, but it's been controversial for 50 years. 40 years I've been around the profession. It's been discussed. So do you trust distance education? I would say I trust distance education more than I trust traditional education if the bells and whistles are right. So here's a real question. How do I know it's you turning in your work, and how do I judge it? For me, I'd say I know you better than if you were actually in the room sitting there looking at me, because I see your work coming in. I've got a number of papers to grade, and I'll be grading those papers, and as I grade those papers, I look at them. I know your writing. I know where you've been. I know your style, and I know it's for real, and I can actually tell if you've plagiarized or not. I swear it, I swear it, I swear it. It's absolutely true. So, we're going to close at QA. And QA is the part that does all this administratively. It tracks the records. It keeps track of it. It's incredibly important to have an excellent service to be doing it. It's important for compliance, and it's also important for legal liability. There is a legal liability course that'll be following up later on, and you'll be taking that next spring or so forth. So it is going to be important that you comply with that legal liability and defend your service should somebody ever make a mistake or somebody sue your service, to show that you had done the training. But that's a later discussion. The actual business ends and the costs of all of this for continuing education, that's coming up in a future week in terms of we talk about the business of EMS and the actual cost benefit analysis and so forth. It's another week or two. So let me know if you have any questions or comments, and thank you for bearing through this 30 minutes. I hope I didn't agonize you too much. I hope you're enjoying the course as much as I am enjoying your time. I've got to do a bunch of grading of papers and so forth, but the heck, I look forward to our next week's discussion too, and I look forward to your dialogues. Take care.